Brought to you by CGTN Europe.
Hello, I'm Stephen Cole. Welcome to the Agenda podcast. This week, we're looking at powering the future. As the world's leaders set themselves increasingly tough targets to cut back on carbon emissions, does this mark the end of our reliance on fossil fuels? And that's a point I put to Joseph McMonigle, Secretary General of the International Energy Forum, who told me the pandemic has proved that those who are writing oil's obituary may be rather premature.
Certainly, COVID has had an impact for sure. I would say, 1 year about this time, we had, a pretty dramatic decline in energy demand. We had we lost about 10 million barrels a day. But forecasts for this year show a rebound of about 5 to 6 million barrels a day. But while certainly the impact to demand was profound and unprecedented, really the biggest demand shock in history, it's important to note that 90% of the demand remained intact, which demonstrates, I think, oil's resiliency and necessity to fuel the world economy. We also identified a big problem that could create significant headwinds just as the global economy tries to recover and the world unlocks from COVID. And this is regarding investment. And the IEF, in collaboration with Boston Consulting Group, published a report in December that warned of future supply shocks caused by mainly oil and gas companies, but some national oil companies reducing investments due to the pandemic. And basically last year, CapEx cuts totaled about 35%. And this year, they're forecast to be between 20 and 30%.
If the investment is falling away, isn't that the clearest signal yet that people are thinking about other fuels apart from fossil fuels?
Well, I mean, certainly there are impacts regarding ESG investing and the move towards the energy transition. But really, the investment crisis that we talked about in our report is directly related to the demand hit from COVID. Now, but to your point, I mean, obviously, pre-COVID, we saw a lot of capital flight from the sector. A lot of that had to do with, basically shareholder returns. You had shareholders move into other growth sectors like healthcare and technology. But I think we're starting to see, actually, now that the oil prices have gone up a little bit, and it looks like we have this very robust demand outlook.
If there is a fall off in investment, which you say may well be bouncing back a little now, and I'm thinking perhaps an attempt around the world to move away from fossil fuels like oil, coal, could gas be a bridging force in any of this, natural gas, for the future?
Well, absolutely. I do believe natural gas is a transition fuel, and it's certainly cleaner, a cleaner fuel. We can make tremendous progress from coal to gas switching, absent other clean technologies to burn coal more cleanly. But gas is really is a basically right now clean fuel that can be scaled up, and certainly renewables play a role, but not basically you can't use wind and solar in every application, and so you're going to need hydrocarbons, mainly natural gas, to kind of fuel, I think, the growing demand in basically non-OECD countries, and really talking a lot of Asia here.
Heading towards COP26, I mean, the ultimate goal is carbon neutral. Is that achievable?
Yes, it is achievable. The question is, what are the pathways? And Is it truly a transition, or is this some kind of disruptive? And I don't mean disruptive in terms of energy sources, but disruptive in terms of the global economy. The important point here is that achieving net zero is not the same as ceasing fossil fuel consumption, because there are many technologies in development that could remove carbon emissions created by burning fossil fuels or offset them. So limited fossil fuel consumption could still continue even with net zero emissions. Look, I think everybody agrees that achieving carbon neutrality is a huge undertaking that will require really an unprecedented global effort. Wind and solar are sort of, mainstream, technologies now. Nuclear also is, and all three of those have to grow as part of this mix. And I know nuclear is controversial, but people are just going to have to get over it. But in terms of new technologies, hydrogen certainly has the most momentum, but there could be others. You could have fusion, methane hydrates. We have to create new technologies, to address climate change. We can't do it with existing technologies. We're not going to, go off fossil fuels tomorrow. So we need to replace them. And these technologies don't exist yet, or they're just not even in a commercialization phase.
Joseph McMonigle, thank you for joining us on The Agenda.
Thank you.
So, as the world looks to alternative sources of energy, what will that mean for the companies known until now as oil and gas giants? To get some insight, I'm joined by Ulrika Wising, Global Vice President of Customer Renewable and Energy Solutions at Shell. Ulrika, Shell says it wants to be a net zero emissions energy business by 2050, or possibly sooner. How will you go about achieving that?
Well, first of all, we aim to be net zero on all the emissions from the manufacturing of all of our products. So reducing the energy that we use when we produce our products. In addition to that, we aim to reduce the carbon intensity of the energy products that we sell by 65% by 2050. And then thirdly, and I think almost most importantly, is that we want to help our customer decarbonize. So by helping our customers in the energy transition will ultimately also reduce the energy footprint of Shell, because the customers will want less and less energy intensive and carbon intensive products. And in doing so, we shift our production to those type of products and also then decarbonize.
Okay, so how or what steps are you taking to encourage your customers to decarbonize?
So I think it's one of those that it requires a village. It really does. We're working with our customers that we've already had really strong relationship with, and we're using the fantastic, engineering skills that sits within Shell and expertise that we have, and working together with the customer, but also with policymakers to really accelerate the transition sector by sector, but really analyzing the sectors and how sectors can have a sustainable pathway in that energy transition.
And that's many different challenges, isn't it? Because there are different sectors, different customers, as you say, aviation, shipping, freight, to name but a few. So how do you improve their footprints?
So I think that there's many different pathways to decarbonization of the different sectors. And like you said, not every sector is created equal, nor is any individual company within a sector created equal. But for example, if you take a sector like aviation as a hypothetical example, today, we create emissions when we produce jet fuels that planes need to fly. But then if you look at the aviation companies, they then create emissions when they use the jet fuel to fly. And these are scope 3 emissions. Dealing with scope 3 starts with reducing the net carbon footprint footprint of the energy we sell to the aviation industry. So that will mean selling increasing amounts of lower carbon fuels over time, such as biofuels, or even in the future, maybe green hydrogen. But even in 2050, some large planes will still need to use conventional jet fuel. And that's why we're aiming to be a net zero emission energy business by then. We must work with the aviation industry to help them deal with those emissions that are left. And the answer is likely going to involve balancing those emissions through nature or technology.
So it's going to be a while yet before we give up totally on fossil fuels, isn't it?
We have gas, electricity generation, and those are going to continue. But take the UK as example again. The coal-fired power plants have not been forced out of operation through regulation per se. They've actually been forced out of operation because they're just too expensive to run. And it's much more cost efficient to build renewables. So I think we're just going to see that transition continuing to happen. Now, we know that fossil fuel will play a key role in decades to come, and not just for energy, but for a lot of the other things that we need for our day-to-day lives. But we also know that we need to play a role in transitioning to renewables and low carbon fuels.
Indeed. Ulrika Wising, Global VP at Shell UK, thanks for joining us on The Agenda. 10% of the world's energy is currently provided by nuclear power. Its proponents insist it's the clean and the efficient solution to global energy supply, but concerns among consumers over safety refuse to go away. So what does the future hold for nuclear power? Joining me now is Dr. Jonathan Cobb, and Dr. Cobb is spokesperson for the World Nuclear Association. What would you say to people who are frightened of nuclear power?
Well, I think the thing to understand with nuclear power is that it is something that's providing an enormous benefit at the moment in supplying that 10% of electricity without greenhouse gas emissions, supplying it cleanly, so generating more electricity than wind, than solar, and it's been supplying that clean electricity for more than 60 years, saving the emission of more than 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year. So it really is a key part of the clean energy mix that we're going to need, and we're going to need to grow over the coming years in order to transition to a net zero electricity generation mix.
So where do you place nuclear power in the mix of renewable power supplies? Where does it fit in?
It fits in by providing a constant and reliable supply of electricity that can be a backbone, a foundation to a grid that can then accommodate more generation from wind, from solar, which provide also clean electricity, but are also intermittent because not always you have wind blowing or sun shining when you need it. So combining nuclear with the renewable options, as well as bringing in energy storage, bringing in production of hydrogen, mixing all those together in a future clean energy system, they can all work together to make that possible. And we really need to move to that system in only a few decades.
According to a report by BP, only 10.4% of the world's electricity was generated by nuclear power in 2019 and only represents 4.6% of global energy consumption. Do you think those proportions will rise in the near future, and how high could they go?
I think they will have to if we're going to succeed both in having a clean energy transition and providing enough electricity, enough energy in order to get to that low carbon mix and still provide enough power to all the people around the world that need it. But just 10%. It's 10%. That's more electricity that's being supplied at the moment by wind, more electricity that's being supplied at the moment by solar. So it's a substantial amount, and it's an amount that's been there for a long time. But there's definitely a need to increase it. I think we need to look at a mix of different clean energy technologies working together. A target that World Nuclear Association has set is for 25% of the world's electricity to be supplied by nuclear energy by 2050. Now, that's an achievable target. It requires a build rate for nuclear power stations that is about the same as was happening in the 1980s. So it doesn't need a major development in terms of build. It's something that we've been able to do. It's a proven build rate for a proven technology. Mix that 25% of nuclear with all the other clean energy options, and it's a thing that can be achieved. It won't be easy, but it will be possible.
Lastly, Dr. Cobb, I mean, we've talked about wind, solar, geothermal, etc., various types of power sources for the future. But is it true to say that really it comes down to nuclear taking over from fossil fuels for a cleaner future?
I think if anybody tells you that one particular technology is the answer to tackling climate change, to moving to a clean energy system, that they're wrong. It's not true. It's a very much more complicated situation. It is going to require all those different forms of clean energy, electricity generation. It's also going to require clean energy which isn't electricity. So one application of nuclear energy in the future would be to generate high temperature heat for industry, so it can be used to replace coal burning in industry. We're also going to need to produce hydrogen cleanly, and nuclear can do that, as well as charging electric cars. So it really is a very complicated mix. I'm very optimistic that we can achieve a clean energy future, but that optimism doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's vital, and I think nuclear energy's got a vital role to play as part of a mix in achieving that.
Dr. Jonathan Cobb of the World Nuclear Association, many thanks for joining us on The Agenda.
Thank you.
Of course, the hope is that one day the world will be able to be powered by entirely renewable, clean and green energy sources. But how likely is that to happen? And perhaps more importantly, when? Well, joining me now from Abu Dhabi is Francesco La Camera, the Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency. Francesco, at the climate summit in April, President Biden pledged to cut carbon emissions by half by the end of 2030. And that's not very long away, just 9 years away. What impact would that have on the renewable energy sector, do you think?
The announcement made by President Biden is very, very important because it's giving a very clear signal to the market. So the world economy, the business is now aware that governments together, they are heading to the 1.5 degrees objective. And from doing this, they have to halve, as the IPCC has been suggested in their 1.5 report a couple of years ago. They have to reduce 45% at least their emission compared to 2010. So country may use a different time for starting on counting on that, but in the average, this is the result.
But so many green targets, sustainable targets are set, and the goals are not met. So how can you be so certain that President Biden's target will be achieved?
We have monitored that last year we have had the best increase in renewable energy capacity, 260 gigawatts, 50% more than the previous year. So there are also all this commitment coming from many countries around all the world, from China to US, to South Korea, to Japan, to South Africa, that make us hoping that this time will be the good time to go in the right direction fast.
IRENA and China's State Grid Corporation signed an agreement in April to enhance its power system. What is the plan and what can you offer?
So we are not only, we have already signed with State Grid, but we are also going to sign with the Ministry for Environment and Ecology, and we are also signing with the National Energy Administration. So during the summit, Xi Jinping have said very clearly that they are going to decrease coal use already in 2025. It's the first time that China is talking about very explicitly and setting a time on decreasing coal. And naturally, this is a way that they can try to match their goals. So our work with them will be to find the right mix for getting the result to be achieved, to provide for exchange of experience, and also working on the basis of their experience to disseminate and share this experience with other reality. So it's a full kind of cooperation, working on the domestic side, but also in the international context.
You were just saying that it's not a single type of power. It's not wind, it's not geothermal, it's not hydro. It's a combination of all of those renewables. But I wonder whether renewable energy as a whole could always likely to be supplementary to other, perhaps less clean types of power in the long run. In other words, will renewable energy sources provide 100% of the world's energy needs ever?
So first of all, if I can, I will never define the renewables in the way to clean energy system as a supplement. So as I just say, the energy system of the future will be based on renewables. We will go there through the profound electrification of the energy system. And where will be difficult to electrify, and renewables will provide more than 9% of the power in 2050, so the electricity. They will be also playing a role for the green hydrogen, so hydrogen that will be produced by renewables. And we are seeing how the cost of the green hydrogen has been decreasing sharply. I remember that last summer there was already a think tank thinking that green hydrogen could become competitive in 2050, but just 6 months later they said that could be 2030, and now companies say that it's 2025. So you see how dramatically is changing the view concerning the green hydrogen. And also the bioenergy is important because coupled with CCS, they can be also go to negative emission. So this is the world where we are going. And we will get there, Stefan. The only thing that is relevant if you want to fight climate change is time. So we have to do this fastly. At the end of this decade, as we say at the starting of our chat today, we'll say if we will be able to reach the goal. Because the later we act, the more difficult it will be to get the result, will be more expensive, and sometimes just not achievable.
But as you say, Francesco, things are becoming more achievable more quickly than ever before, which is the good news. So, Francesco La Camera, thank you so much for joining us here on the agenda.
Thank you very much. If I can say in my language, grazie. Grazie a voi tutti.
Grazie, I love it. We're taking a break next week, but we'll be back in 2 weeks' time to look at how COVID has pushed back gender equality by an entire generation. Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher and Spotify. You can also find us on CGTN Europe, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube. And we'd love it if you could leave us a rating and a review. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.